names of the poets, the historians, the legal and scientific writers who flourished under Soliman would fill an ample page, but it would be one of little interest to us, while Turkish literature remains so generally unknown in Western Europe, even through the medium of translations. But because unknown, it must not be assumed to be unreal, and Solomon was as generous and discerning a patron of literary merit as any of the sovereigns of Western Europe, who have acquired for their age and courts the much coveted epithet of Augustan. Solomon's own writings are considered to hold an honorable station, though not among the highest in his nation's literature. His poems are said to be dignified in sentiment and correct in expression, and his journals, in which he noted the chief events of each day during his campaigns, are highly serviceable to the investigator of history. They prove the Sultan's possession of qualities which are of far more value in sovereign than are the accomplishments of the successful author. They show his sense of duty, his industry, and his orderly and unremitting personal attention to the civil as well as the military affairs of the vast empire that had been committed to his charge. Faults, deplorable faults, are unquestionable to the traced in his reign. The excessive influence which he allowed his favorite sultana to acquire, the cruel deeds of his children, and of so many statesmen whom he gave over the executioner, are heavy stains on his memory. His own countrymen have pointed out the defects in his government. Kochubey, who wrote in the reign of Amurath I, 1623, and who is termed by von Hammer the Turkish Montesquieu, assigns in his work on the decline of the Ottoman Empire, which he traces up to the reign of the first Suleiman, among the causes of that decline. First, the cessation in Suleiman's time of the regular attendance of the Sultan at the meetings of the Divan. Second, the habit then introduced of appointing men to high stations who had not previously passed through the gradation of lower offices. Third, the venality and corruption first practiced by Soliman's son-in-law and Grand Vizier Rostam, who sold the people of the lowest character and capacity the very highest civil offices through the appointment to all military ranks, high or low, was still untainted by bribery or other dishonest influence. The fourth censure passed by Kochubey and Soliman is for his evil example in exceeding the limits of wise liberality, and heaping wheels upon the same favorite vizier, and allowing him not only to acquire enormous riches but to make them by an abuse of the Turkish martial law. Inalienable in his family, this was done by transforming his estates into vaks of vakofs, that is to say, by settling his property on some mosque or other religious foundation, which took from it a small quiet rent and held the rest in trust for the donor and his family. While admitting the justice of these charges of the Oriental historian, von Hammer exposes the groundlessness of censure which European writers have passed upon Soliman, when accusing him of having introduced the custom of shutting up the young princes of the House of Osman in the seraglio instead of training them to lead armies and govern provinces. They point out that all the sons of Soliman who gave up to manhood administered partialities under him, and that one of his last acts before his death was to appoint Amurad, his grandson, to the government of Magnesia. In the same spirit in which Arrian sums up the character of Alexander the Great, the German historian rightly warns us when estimating that of Suleiman the Great not to fix our attention exclusively on the blamable actions of his life, but to remember also the bright and noble qualities which adorned him. As a man he was warm-hearted and sincere, and honorably poor from the depraved sensuality which has disgraced to many of his nation. We must remember his princely courage, his military genius, his high and enterprising spirit, his strict observance of the laws of his religion without any taint of big-tooth persecution. The order and economy which he combined with so much grandeur and munificence, his liberal encouragement of art and literature, his zeal for the diffusion and education, the conquests by which he extended his empire, and the wise and comprehensive legislation with which he provided for the good government of all his subjects, let him be thus taken for all in all, and we shall feel his incontestable right to the title of a great sovereign, which now for 3 centuries he has maintained. Chapter 11. Selim II is degree peace with Austria, first conflict between Turks and Russians, conquest of Cyprus, battle of Lepanto, Uluc, Ali's energy, deeds of Selim. Solomon the Great, the Magnificent, the lawgiver, the lord of his age, was succeeded by a prince to whom his own national historians give the epithet of Selim the Third. The ignoble vices of the prince, the secure whose accession so much and such dear blood had been shed, had attracted the sorrowful notice and drawn down the indignant reprimand of the old sultan in his latter years. But there was now no brother to compete for the throne with Selim, and on the 25th of September 1566 the sabre of the Ottoman was girt for the first time on a sovereign who shrank from leading in person the armies of Islam and wasted in low debauchery the hours which his predecessors and consecrated to the duties of state. The effects of the fatal the Grand Sea were not immediately visible. The perfect organization, civil and military, in which Suleiman had left the empire, quartered for the time after the strong hand, which had fashioned and knit it together for nearly half a century, was withdrawn. There was a numerous for nearly half a century was withdrawn. There was a numerous body of statesmen and generals who had been trained under the great Sultan, and thus somewhat of his spirit was preserved in the realm until they had passed away and another generation arisen, which knew not Suleiman. Foremost of this was the Grand Vizier Mohammed Sokoli, who had victoriously concluded the campaign of Shiget after Suleiman's death, and who, fortunately for Selim and his kingdom, acquired and maintained an ascendancy over the weak mind of the young Suleiman, which was not indeed always strong enough to prevent the adoption of evil measures, or to curb the personal excesses of Selim's private life, but which checked the progress of anarchy and maintained the air of grandeur in enterprise and of vigor in execution by which the Supreme Porte had hitherto been distinguished. An armistice was concluded with the Emperor Maximilian in 1568 on the terms that each party should retain possession of what it then occupied, and there was now for many years an unusual pause in the war between the house of Habsburg and Osman. The great foreign events of Selim's reign are the attempts to conquer Astrakhan and unite the Don and the Volga, the conquest of Cyprus, and the naval war of the Battle of Lepanto. The first of these is peculiarly interesting because the Turks were then for the first time brought into armed collision with the Russians. In the middle of the 16th century, while the Ottoman Empire, and at the meridian of its glory, was the terror and administration of the world, the Russian was slowly and painfully struggling out of the degradation and ruin with which it had been afflicted by 2 centuries and a half of Tartar conquest. The craft and courage of Ivan III and Vasily Ivanovich had between 1380 and 1533 emancipated Moscow from paying tribute to the Khans of Kipchak, and by annexing other Russian principalities to that Muscovy. These princes had formed an united Russia, which extended from Kiev to Kazan and as far as Siberia and Norwegian Lapland. Even thus early the Grand Dukes, or as they began to style themselves, the Tsars of Muscovy, seem to have cherished ambitious projects of reigning in Constantinople. Ivan III sought out and married Sophia, the last princess of the Greek imperial family from which the conquering Ottomans had wrested Byzantium. From that time forth, the two-headed eagle, which had been the imperial cognizance of the emperors of Constantinople, had been assumed by the Russian sovereigns as their symbol of dominion during the minority of Ivan the Terrible, who succeeded in 1533. A period of anarchy ensued in Russia, but on that prince assuming the government, the vigor of the state was restored. The Khans of Astrakhan and Kazan were conquered and family annexed to Russia. The Don Cossacks were united with the Empire of Yermak. One of their chiefs invaded and acquired for Ivan the vast regions of Siberia. The extent of Russia at Ivan's accession was 37,000 German square miles. At his death it was 100,044. But though little was Russia then heeded or known in Western Europe, that the charter given by Philip and Mary to the first company of English merchants trading thither purports to be granted upon the discovery of the said country, likening it to some region of savages which civilized men might then treat for the first time amid the American wilderness. Yet even at that period those who watched the immense extent of the crude materials for warlike power, which the Tsar of Muscovy possessed, the numbers, the rugged hardihood of his people, their implicit obedience to their autocrat, their endurance of privations, and the nature of country, though difficult for an invader, expressed their forebodings of the peril to which the independence of other states might be exposed by Muscovite ambition, if once those rude masses acquired the arms and the discipline of civilized war. It is melancholy and recognized in the fate of Poland and so many other countries the truth of the words used by Polish King Sigismund nearly 3 centuries ago, when in remonstrating with England for supplying the Tsar with military engineers and stores, he called him the Muscovite, the hereditary enemy of all three nations. The Russians at the time of Salem's accession had been involved in fierce and frequent wars with the Sultan's vassals, the Crim Tatars, but the Porte and taken no part in these contests. But the bold genius of the Vizier Sokolly now attempted the realization of a project which, if successful, would have buried the southern progress of Russia, by firmly planting the Ottoman power on the banks of the Don and the Volga, and along the shores of the Caspian Sea. The Turkish armies in their invasions of Persia had always suffered severely during their marches along the sterile and mountainous regions of Upper Armenia and Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan. Some disputes of Persia had arisen soon after Salim's accession, which made a war with that kingdom seem probable, and Sokolly proposed to unite the rivers Don and Volga by a canal and then send a Turkish armament up to the Sea of Azov and the Don, thence across by the Intent Channel to the Volga, and then down the latter river into the Caspian, from the southern shores of which sea the Ottomans might strike at Tabriz, and the heart of Persian power. Those two mighty rivers, the Don and the Volga, run towards each other, the one from the northwest, the other from the northeast, for many hundred leagues, until they are within 30 miles of junction. They then diverge, and the Don, the extremest Tanais of the ancients, pours its waters into the Sea of Azov near the city of that name. The Volga blends with the Caspian at a little distance from the city of Astrakhan, which is built on the principal branch of the delta of that river. The project of uniting them by a canal is aided to have been one and entertained by Seleucus Nicator, one of the ablest of the successors of Alexander the Great. It was now revived by the Grand Vizier of Selim II, and sought the cloud of hostility with Persia passed over, solely determined to preserve with the shame the immense commercial and political advantage of which, if completed to the Ottoman Empire, were evident to the old statesmen of Suleiman the Great. Azov already belonged to the Turks, but in order to realize the great project entertained, it was necessary to occupy Astrakhan also. Accordingly, 3,000 emissaries and 20,000 horse were sent to besiege Astrakhan, and a cooperative force of 30,000 Tatars was ordered to join them, and to aid the making the canal 5,000 emissaries and 3,000 pioneers were at the same time sent to Azov to commence and secure the great work at its western extremity. But the generals of Ivan the Terrible did their duty, duty to their stern master ably in this emergency. The Russian garrison of Astrakhan sallied on its besiegers and repulsed them with considerable loss, and a Russian army 15,000 strong under Prince Serebinov came suddenly on the workmen and the emissaries near Azov and put them to headlong flight. It was upon this occasion that the first trophies won from the Turks came into Russian hands. An army of Tatars which marched to succor the Turks was also entirely defeated by Ivan's force, and the Ottomans, dispirited by their losses and reverses, withdrew altogether from the enterprise. Their Tartar allies, who knew that the close neighborhood of the Turks would ensure their own entire subjection to the Sultan, eagerly promoted the distaste which the Ottomans had acquired for Sokol's project by enlarging on the horrors of the climate of the Muscovy, and especially on the peril in which the short summer nights of those northern regions placed either the soul or the body of the true believer. As the Mohammedan law requires the evening prayer to be said 2 hours after sunset and the morning prayer to be repeated at the dawn of day, it was necessary that a Muslim should, in a night of only 3 hours long, according to the Tatars, either lose his natural rest or violate the commands of his prophet. The Turks gladly re-embarked and left the unpropitious soil, but a tempest assailed their flotilla on its homeward voyage, and only 7,000 of their whole force ever returned to Constantinople. Russia was yet far too weak to enter on a war of retaliation with the Turks. She had subdued the Tartar Khanates of Hasan al-Astrakhan, but their kinsmen of Crimea were still formidable enemies to the Russians, even without Turkish aid. It was only 2 years after the Ottoman expedition to the Don and Volga that the Khan of the Krim made a victorious inroad into Russia, took Moscow by storm, and sacked the city 1571. The Tsar Ivan had, in 1517, sent an ambassador named Nossolitov to Constantinople to complain of the Turkish attack in Astrakhan and to propose that there should be peace, friendship, and alliance between the two empires. Nossolitov, and in addressing the viziers, dwelt much on the toleration which his master showed to Mohammedans in his dominions as a proof of the Tsar was no enemy to the faith of Islam. The Russian ambassador was favorably received at the Supreme Court, and no further hostilities between the Turks and Russians took place for nearly a century. But the Ottoman pride and contempt for Russia were shown by the Sultan omitting to make the customary inquiry of Nossolitov respecting his royal master's heresy, and by the Tsar respective not receiving the invitation to a dinner before audience, which was unusually sent to ambassadors.